My name was Theron Vastus, and I have been eating my brothers for 217 years. Not out of hunger. The homophagia implant embedded in my enhanced physiology renders traditional starvation nearly impossible. Not out of madness, though the Inquisition observers who watch us from their monitoring stations believe otherwise. I consume the dead because it is my duty, my purpose. The only way I can preserve what remains of my chapter's knowledge in this cursed exile where we have been forgotten by the Imperium we swore to serve. I am a death spectre, and the irony of that name has become so profound it borders on cruel poetry. We are spectres, ghosts of what Space Marines should be. And we bring death, yes, but mostly to ourselves. Our own legacy consumed bite by bite, memory by memory, in an eternal cycle that grows more horrifying with each passing decade. But let me tell you how I got here. Let me tell you about the last time I tasted real food, about the moment I first understood what the homophagia truly meant, about the day I learned that knowledge has a price, and that price is paid in the flesh of those you loved. Let me tell you about the Feast of Remembrance, and why the Inquisition is right to fear us. I was 17 years old when they took me from Occludus, the death world that served as our chapter's recruitment ground. 17 standard Terran years, young by Savisian standards, ancient by the metrics of most recruitment processes. The Death Spectres preferred older aspirants, boys who had survived long enough to prove their resilience, who understood death intimately enough to serve those who dealt in it professionally. Occludus earned its designation honestly. The planet's star was dying, its radiation output fluctuating wildly, creating zones of lethality that shifted with the solar winds. One day, a valley would be habitable. The next, anything living within it would be cooked by hard radiation. Survival required constant movement, reading subtle environmental cues, understanding when to flee and when to shelter. I had been born into a nomadic clan, 63 individuals when I was born, 22 by the time I was recruited. The radiation claimed some. Predators took others. Starvation and disease and simple accidents winnowed us down year after year. My father died when I was 12. His body swelling with tumors, his mind fragmenting as the cancers spread to his brain. I held his hand while he died, while he forgot my name, forgot his own name, forgot everything except the pain. He had taught me to track, to hunt, to read the sky for signs of radiation storms. He had taught me the clan's oral histories, the stories of ancestors who had survived impossible odds, who had endured when endurance seemed futile. Remember, he would say, his voice rough from breathing Occludus's caustic atmosphere. Memory is survival. The dead live as long as we remember them. Forget, and they die twice. I remembered. When he was gone, I carried his lessons, his stories, his voice in my head. It was all I had of him. The Death Spectres came to Occludus every 5 years, their black-hulled Thunderhawk descending from orbit like a judgment from the Imperium itself. They would gather the clans, test the boys who had survived to adolescence, select the strongest, the smartest, the most resilient. It was considered an honor. To be chosen meant elevation beyond the grinding struggle of Occludus, meant service to the Emperor, as the priests who occasionally visited claimed, meant transformation into something greater than human. I did not believe the priests. Down on Occludus, 500 light-years from Terra, their promises of divine protection rang hollow. The Emperor, if he existed as anything more than a useful fiction to maintain social cohesion, did not protect us from the radiation, from the predators, from the slow, grinding death of existence on a world that was actively trying to kill its inhabitants. But I believed in the Death Spectres themselves. I had seen them. 8-foot-tall warriors in black power armor, decorated with skull motifs and death imagery, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for beings so massive. They were real, tangible, powerful. If I could become like them, I could escape Occludus. I could survive not just another year, but centuries. I could become something that the universe could not so easily erase. So, when they tested me, physical endurance trials that left 3 boys dead, psychological evaluations that broke two more into catatonic states, genetic compatibility screenings that I did not understand but submitted to with desperate hope. I gave everything. When they asked if I was willing to serve, willing to die for the Imperium, willing to become something no longer entirely human, I said yes without hesitation. I was lying, of course. I did not care about the Imperium, about the Emperor, about service or duty or any of the grand concepts they invoked. I cared about survival. I cared about power. I cared about escaping the death world that had killed my father and would inevitably kill me if I remained. They accepted me anyway. Perhaps they knew I was lying. Perhaps they did not care as long as I was physically and psychologically capable of enduring the transformation. Perhaps they understood that motivation mattered less than capability, that soldiers could be created from ambition as easily as from faith. They took 12 of us that year. 12 boys between 15 and 18, lifted from Occludus in the Thunderhawk's hold, watching through the viewports as our death world shrank to a point of dying light, then vanished as we entered the warp. The journey to the Death Specter's Fortress Monastery took 3 weeks of warp travel. They kept us in a holding bay, fed us rations of corpse starch and reclaimed water, subjected us to preliminary medical examinations. A chaplain, Brother Chaplain Mordax, his armor black even by Death Spectre standards, his skull-faced helmet never removed in our presence, visited daily to instruct us in chapter doctrine. "You will become Death Spectres," he told us, his voice emerging from his helmet's vox grill with a metallic rasp that made every word sound like a threat. "You will serve the Imperium until death claims you. You will learn the ways of war, the disciplines of the Adeptus Astartes, the knowledge that has been passed down through 10,000 years of service. But knowledge is not given freely. Knowledge must be earned. Knowledge must be consumed." He did not explain what that meant. Not then. The Fortress Monastery was located on an asteroid designated Mortis Prime, a lifeless rock in a system so far from major shipping lanes that the Imperium barely remembered we existed. The Death Spectres preferred isolation. It allowed them to operate without oversight, to maintain their particular traditions without interference from more orthodox chapters. The fortress itself was ancient, pre-heresy construction according to the few historical texts I would later access, built into the asteroid structure rather than on its surface. Kilometers of corridors and chambers carved from rock, lit by flickering lumen strips that cast everything in shades of gray and black. The aesthetic was oppressive, deliberately so. Everywhere you looked, death imagery. Skulls carved into walls, bones incorporated into decorative elements, murals depicting famous battles where Death Spectres had died gloriously, their sacrifices commemorated in art that emphasized the gore and horror rather than sanitizing it. "Death is our companion," Mordax explained as he led us through the fortress on our first day. "We do not fear it. We do not deny it. We embrace it as the only certainty in a universe of chaos and suffering." Other chapters preach about honor, about glory, about the Emperor's protection. We preach truth. You will die. Perhaps in battle, perhaps in training, perhaps of simple mechanical failure when an implant rejects. Death is inevitable. The only question is whether your death will mean something. The other aspirants, I learned their names during those first days: Kairos, Demetrian, Solon, Marcus, Titus, Gregorius, Antioch, Nicholas, Severus, Castor, Lucan, seemed variously inspired or terrified by this philosophy. I found it refreshingly honest. At least, the Death Spectres did not lie about what awaited us. The training was designed to kill us, not metaphorically, not as hyperbole, but as literal stated purpose. Approximately 60% of aspirants survived the initial augmentation process. An apothecary named Brother Hestus informed us with clinical detachment. Another 20% die during the first year of training. The remaining 20% become initiates. Those are acceptable numbers. Acceptable to whom, I wondered, but did not ask. The question was rhetorical anyway. They started with the easiest implants: secondary heart, osmodular to reinforce our skeletons, muscular enhancement. The surgeries were conducted in a medici facility that looked more like a butcher's shop than a hospital. Metal tables, inadequate lighting, instruments that were functional but showed centuries of use. The apothecaries worked with mechanical efficiency, cutting and installing and suturing while we were conscious, claiming that awareness during augmentation helped the body accept the foreign tissue. I did not believe this. I suspected they kept us conscious, because unconsciousness was a mercy they chose not to provide, because pain was part of the conditioning, because screaming was expected, and anything less would mark you as suspiciously deviant. So I screamed. We all screamed. Even Severus, the largest and most stoic of our group, screamed when they cracked open his ribcage to install the second heart, when they held the mirror so he could watch his own chest cavity opened to the air, could see his original heart beating alongside the new augmented one they were connecting to, his cardiovascular system. The pain was extraordinary, not just the physical sensation of tissue trauma, but the wrongness of it, the violation of having your body invaded and restructured by external forces. I understood in those moments why some aspirants went mad, why some rejected the augmentation not physically but psychologically, their minds breaking rather than accepting this transformation into something post-human. I survived because I had survived occludus, because pain was familiar, was survivable, was just another challenge to overcome through willpower and refusal to quit. Because I was too stubborn to die when dying would prove the universe right about my insignificance. Kairos was not so stubborn. He died during the muscular enhancement procedure, his body rejecting the enhanced muscle tissue, his immune system attacking the foreign cells until he went into shock. The apothecaries let him convulse on the table for 17 minutes while they monitored his vital signs, documenting his failure for future reference. When his heart, both hearts, finally stopped, they disconnected the monitoring equipment, made notations on data slates, and called for servitors to remove the body. "Return to your training cells," Brother Hestus instructed us. "The deceased will be processed. His sacrifice will not be wasted." I did not understand what that meant until 3 days later. They gathered us in a chamber deep in the fortress, a hall I had not previously seen. It was circular, 30 meters in diameter, with a high-vaulted ceiling decorated with skulls, real skulls, thousands of them, arranged in geometric patterns that drew the eye upward toward a central oculus that showed the stars beyond. At the center of the chamber stood a table. On the table, arranged with almost ritualistic care, were cuts of meat, red, fresh, prepared with the precision of an expert butcher. Chaplain Mordax stood beside the table, his skull-faced helmet regarding us with empty eye sockets. Around the chamber's perimeter, full battle brothers of the chapter stood in silent observation. 20 of them, their black armor making them look like shadows given form and purpose. "Aspirants," Mordax began, his voice echoing in the chamber's acoustics. "You have lost a brother. Kairos, who survived 17 years on Occludus, who passed every test we gave him, who endured 4 successful augmentations before his body failed him. He is gone. But he is not wasted. The death specters do not waste our fallen. We do not bury them, we do not burn them, we consume them, and in consuming we preserve." He gestured to the table, to the meat. Understanding came slowly, then all at once. The meat was red because it was human. The precision of the cuts suggested ritual significance. The silence of the assembled battle brothers was anticipation. "The Omophageia," Mordax continued, "is one of the 19 implants you will receive if you survive the augmentation process. It allows Space Marines to gain genetic memory from consumed flesh, to absorb knowledge, skills, experiences from those we eat. Most chapters use this capability sparingly, consuming enemy commanders to learn their strategies, eating alien specimens to understand their biology. The Death Specters have refined this gift. We have made it central to our existence. When a brother falls, we consume him. We take his memories, his knowledge, his very essence into ourselves. He lives on, not in some abstract spiritual sense, but literally, his experiences preserved in the neural pathways of those who eat his flesh. He approached the table, selected a cut. I recognized it with horrible clarity as part of a human thigh, and raised it ceremonially. Kairos survives in this flesh. His memories of Occludus, his training, his brief time among us, all of it encoded in his tissue, waiting to be absorbed. To refuse to eat him would be to let him die completely, to waste his sacrifice, to dishonor his memory. We do not dishonor our dead. We consume them. We remember them. We become them. The logic was horrible and perfect. I wanted to reject it, wanted to feel revulsion, wanted to maintain some human response of disgust at the prospect of cannibalism. But I had eaten stranger things on Occludus. I had consumed insects and fungi and meat from animals that probably should not be eaten, all because the alternative was starvation. This was just another survival challenge, just another price for power. And beneath the rationalization, a darker thought. If knowledge could be gained this way, if consuming the dead truly preserved their memories, then this was power beyond anything I had imagined. This was immortality of a sort, not of the body, but of the mind, the self, the accumulated experiences that made a person more than just meat. Eat, Mordax commanded. Honor your fallen brother. Begin your education in the true ways of the death specters. We ate, all 11 of us, approaching the table, selecting portions, consuming flesh that had been our companion just days before. The meat was unseasoned, prepared purely for functional consumption rather than pleasure. It tasted like copper and salt, like blood inadequately drained, like every primal taboo encoded in human consciousness, screaming that this was wrong. I chewed. I swallowed. I felt the flesh settle into my stomach, felt my body begin to break it down, felt nothing else, no sudden influx of memories, no mystical connection to the deceased. The homophagia had not been installed in us yet. This was just meat. But the ritual had been established, the expectation set. When we received the homophagia implant, we would return to this chamber. We would eat our dead. And we would become something that blurred the boundaries between individual and collective, between self and chapter, between life and the hungry immortality of being remembered through consumption. The homophagia implant came in my 7th month of training after I had survived 11 other augmentations. By then, we were down to 8 aspirants. Demetrian had died when his catalepsian node malfunctioned during installation, triggering a brain hemorrhage. Marcus had died during combat training, his enhanced reflexes insufficient to save him when a training servitor malfunctioned and crushed his skull. Antioch had simply vanished one day, and no one explained where he had gone, though I suspected his body had been processed like the others. The homophagia installation was performed by Brother Hestus in the same Medici facility where all augmentations occurred. Unlike some implants that required opening the chest cavity or accessing the brain, the homophagia was relatively simple. A small organ installed in the spinal cord at the base of the neck, connected to the digestive system through neural interfaces. The homophagia, Hestus explained while he worked his servo-enhanced tools, cutting with precision through the muscle and tissue of my neck, allows you to extract genetic memory from consumed tissue. The mechanism is not fully understood, some combination of genetic encoding and neurochemical transfer. The Mechanicus claims it is a gift from the Emperor's own research into human enhancement. I find it more likely to be recovered xenotech from the Dark Age, repurposed and inadequately understood. He did not seem concerned that such speculation bordered on heresy. The Death Specters, I was learning, maintained a pragmatic relationship with imperial doctrine. They paid lip service to required beliefs while privately acknowledging that much of what they were told was useful fiction rather than literal truth. When you consume flesh containing genetic memory, he continued, installing the homophagia with careful pressure, the organ processes specific proteins and transfers the encoded information to your brain. You will experience this as memories, not your own, but vivid enough to seem so. The effect varies by individual. Some brothers report perfect recall. Others receive only fragments, impressions, emotional residue. Your brain will learn to process the data more efficiently over time. He finished the installation, sealed the incision with medical adhesive, and released me from the restraints. Report to the feast chamber tomorrow. You will test your new capability under supervision. I had not been back since consuming Kairos 7 months prior, but I had known I would return eventually. The entire augmentation process was building toward this, creating warriors who could preserve their fallen through consumption, who could maintain knowledge across generations through the act of eating their dead. It was efficient, it was practical, it was absolutely horrifying in its implications. The next day they brought us to the feast chamber again. 8 of us now, myself, Solon, Titus, Gregorius, Nicholos, Severus, Castor, and Lucan. We stood before the table where cuts of meat had been arranged. From Marcus, I was told, processed after his death 3 weeks prior. Today, Chaplain Mordax intoned, you become true aspirants of the death specters. You will consume the flesh of your fallen brother. You will receive his memories. You will understand what knowledge costs, and why we pay that price willingly. He distributed portions. I received what appeared to be a section of arm muscle, approximately 200 grams, prepared with the same clinical precision as before. Eat, Mordax commanded. I ate. The flesh was cold, refrigerated for preservation. I chewed slowly, breaking down the muscle fibers, feeling the meat slide down my throat into my stomach, where the omophagia would process it, extract the genetic memory, translate it into something my brain could interpret. The memories hit me approximately 40 seconds after I swallowed. Suddenly, I was Marcus, 17 years old, standing in Occludus's wastes, tracking a 6-legged predator through radiation-twisted vegetation. I knew his thoughts, as if they were my own. Hunger, determination, the calculation of whether he could take the creature alone or needed to retreat and bring help. I felt his hands, larger than mine, scarred differently, grip the crude spear he carried. I felt his heartbeat accelerate as the creature turned, as it detected his presence, as it charged with speed that seemed impossible for something so massive. I felt him thrust the spear, felt the impact as it punched through the creature's hide, felt the hot spray of blood across his face. I felt his satisfaction at the kill, his quick assessment of the meat yield, his decision about which portions to take and which to leave for scavengers. Then the memory shifted. Marcus at 15, watching his uncle die from radiation poisoning, the older man's body swelling with tumors, his skin blackening and sloughing off. Marcus sitting vigil, memorizing the man's face, his voice, his stories, trying to preserve him through memory, because that was all that remained. Another shift, Marcus during aspirant training during the trial where he had died. The training servitor approaching, its combat protocols clearly malfunctioning, its strikes too powerful, too rapid. Marcus, trying to dodge, his enhanced reflexes buying him 3 seconds of life before the metal fist connected with his skull, before the world exploded into pain and darkness and nothing. I gasped, back in my own body, my own consciousness. The memories were fading already, becoming less immediate, less vivid, but they had been real. For those moments, I had been Marcus. I had experienced his life, his death, his accumulated knowledge and skills. Around me, the other aspirants were experiencing similar reactions. Solon crying silently, Titus staring at his hands as though they belonged to someone else, Gregorius vomiting onto the floor before composing himself. You understand now, Mordax said, and there might have been something like sympathy in his mechanical voice. This is the gift, this is the curse. We eat our dead not out of savagery, but out of necessity. Knowledge that took years to accumulate can be transferred in minutes through consumption. Skills refined through practice become accessible to those who consume the flesh that developed them. The dead teach the living preserve the dead. It is efficient, it is practical, and it is absolutely necessary for our survival. He paused, letting us absorb both the literal flesh and the philosophical implications. The death specters are an isolated chapter. We operate far from support, far from the Imperium's attention. We cannot afford to lose knowledge when brothers fall. We cannot afford the decades it would take to retrain warriors in skills the deceased possessed. So we eat, we remember, we preserve. And through this ritual, we have maintained our capability despite casualties that would cripple other chapters. It made sense, horrible, undeniable sense. In the grim calculus of survival, cannibalism was simply another tool, another adaptation to harsh circumstances. Not evil, not good, just necessary. But Mordax was not finished. However, he continued, his voice dropping lower, you must understand the danger. The homophagia was never intended for regular use on human tissue, especially tissue from your own brothers. The genetic memory transfer works, yes, but it creates problems. Confusion between your memories and the consumed's memories. Identity blurring. In extreme cases, what the apothecaries call ego death. The dissolution of self into the collective memories of all consumed brothers. We have protocols to prevent this. We limit consumption to necessary occasions. We provide psychological conditioning. But the risk remains. The more you eat, the less certain you become of who you are. He looked at each of us in turn, his skull-faced helmet making it impossible to read any human emotion beneath. So I ask you now, knowing what this will cost, knowing what you will become, do you choose to continue? Or do you wish to leave the chapter, to return to Occludus and resume your mortal life? We all knew that leaving meant execution. The secrets we had learned, the augmentations we had received, made us too valuable and too dangerous to release. But Mordax offered the illusion of choice, the pretense that we were consenting to our fate. I continue, I said, and my voice was steady. One by one, the others spoke the same words. Mordax nodded, satisfied. Then you are truly death specters now. You have eaten the dead. You have become something more than human, less than human. Something the Imperium would not understand and the Inquisition would condemn. But you are ours, and we will teach you everything we know, through consumption, through the feast, through the endless cycle of death and remembrance that keeps our chapter alive. He raised one armored fist in salute. The assembled battle brothers around the chamber's perimeter repeated the gesture. Welcome, Mordax said, to the death specters. May you die well, and may your brothers eat your flesh with honor. I spent the next 4 years completing my transformation from human to space marine. 4 years of augmentation, training, indoctrination, and increasingly frequent visits to the feast chamber as more aspirants fell to the brutal attrition of the process. Solon died when his Betcher's gland installation went wrong, the acid-producing organ rupturing internally and dissolving him from the inside over the course of 6 agonizing hours. We ate him 3 days later. I received memories of his childhood on Occludus, his particular skill at reading weather patterns, his fear during the augmentation process, fear he had hidden well, but which the memories revealed with brutal honesty. Titus died in combat training against a full battle brother, his hubris leading him to take risks his still-developing body could not support. The battle brother, a veteran named Vorkos, crushed Titus's chest with a single powered strike, caving in his fused ribcage, pulverizing his hearts. We ate him a week later. I gained his memories of aggression, of calculated violence, of the moment he realized he had made a fatal error and could not undo it. Gregorius simply vanished one day. No explanation was offered. I assumed he had been recycled, his flesh prepared for consumption, though we never formally feasted on him. Perhaps his remains were distributed more quietly, mixed into our rations without ceremony. By the time I completed my final augmentation, the black carapace that would allow me to interface with power armor, only 4 of us remained from the original 12, myself, Nicholos, Severus, and Castor. We were no longer aspirants. We were neophytes, not yet full battle brothers but close, possessing all 19 implants, trained in the use of power armor and bolter, ready for our first combat deployments. The feast chamber became routine. Every month, it seemed, we gathered to consume someone. sometimes aspirants who had failed, sometimes battle brothers who had died in training accidents, or the occasional skirmish with pirates or orcs in our sector. Each time, I ate and received memories and felt my sense of self erode slightly, felt the boundaries between Theron Vastus and everyone I have consumed become more permeable. I learned to compartmentalize, to recognize which memories were mine and which were inherited, to maintain the core of my identity even as I accumulated the experiences of dozens of dead men. Most neophytes managed this successfully. A few did not. I heard stories of brothers who had consumed too much too quickly, whose personalities had fragmented into something unstable, who had been quietly euthanized and fed back into the cycle. The death specters did not waste anything, including their failures. My first combat deployment came in my 5th year as a neophyte, a minor orc incursion on an agri-world designated harvest, 3 systems from our fortress. The death specters sent a strike force. 30 battle brothers, 5 neophytes including myself, led by Captain Heracles. We deployed via Thunderhawk, dropped into a war zone where the orcs had already massacred half the planetary population. Our mission was simple: eliminate the war boss, decapitate the orc leadership, let their fractious nature destroy their cohesion. I killed my first orc in the opening minutes of combat. It charged at me, screaming its primitive war cry, its crude axe raised, its pig-like face twisted in bloodlust. I fired 3 bolter rounds, mass reactive shells that detonated inside its body, blowing it apart from the inside. The creature fell in pieces, still trying to swing its weapon even as its torso separated from its legs. I felt nothing. The emotional response I might have had as a human, horror, triumph, fear, was absent. The conditioning had worked. I was a weapon, and weapons do not feel remorse for fulfilling their purpose. We fought for 17 hours straight, pushing through the orc lines, killing everything that moved. The greenskins were numerous but disorganized, their tactics more enthusiasm than strategy. Against disciplined space marines, they stood no chance. Captain Heracles killed the war boss in personal combat, a massive orc twice the size of a normal human, wearing scavenged armor and wielding a power claw that could have torn through tank plating. Heracles dismantled it methodically, his power sword removing limbs before finally decapitating it, holding the severed head high as the remaining orcs fled in disarray. We returned to the Thunderhawk victorious. Harvest 7 was saved. The Imperium's food production would continue uninterrupted. The local population would name us heroes, build shrines in our honor, tell stories of the black armored angels who had delivered them from the Xeno threat. But we had paid a price. 2 battle brothers dead, killed by orc heavy weapons. Brothers Valen and Crimson, both veterans with decades of service. Their bodies were retrieved, preserved in stasis, transported back to Mortis Prime for processing. 3 weeks later, we feasted on them. I consumed a portion of Brother Valen's flesh, tissue from his bicep, approximately 300 grams. The memories came immediately. 47 years of service to the chapter, hundreds of battles, countless kills, techniques for close-quarters combat, experience reading enemy formations, the weight of accumulated knowledge that only decades of survival could provide. But also, loneliness. The awareness that he had consumed so many brothers that he could no longer remember which memories were his own. The gradual erosion of his original personality until Valen was just a name attached to a collection of inherited experiences. The relief when the orc slugger rounds had punched through his armor, when death had finally come, when he could stop being a repository for the dead and simply cease. I returned to my cell that night and sat in silence, processing what I had experienced. Valen had been ready to die, perhaps had wanted to die. The accumulation of consumed memories had become unbearable, a weight of other people's lives that crushed his own identity. This was my future. This was what awaited all death specters who survived long enough. Not death in glorious battle, but gradual dissolution into a collective consciousness. Individuality lost to the necessity of preserving the chapter's knowledge. I should have been horrified. But I found I could not maintain the emotion. The conditioning was too deep, the rationalization too complete. This was necessary. This was survival. This was the price of power and immortality, and the privilege of serving something larger than myself. I accepted it, and in accepting, I took another step away from the human I had been, toward the thing I would become. The warp storm came in my 32nd year as a death spectre, my 9th year as a full battle brother. It was not dramatic in its arrival. No sudden catastrophe, no apocalyptic signs. Our navigators simply reported increasing difficulty maintaining stable routes through the immaterium. Warp currents that had been reliable for millennia were shifting, becoming turbulent, developing eddies and undertows that made travel dangerous. Systems that had been 3 days' journey apart suddenly required 3 weeks, then 3 months, then became unreachable entirely. Within a year, we were cut off. Mortis Prime, our fortress monastery, became an island in a sea of impassable warp storms. No ships could reach us. We could not reach anyone else. Communications were impossible. Vox transmissions could not penetrate the warp interference, and astropathic signals simply vanished into the screaming chaos of the immaterium's disrupted currents. Chapter Master Thanatos, the supreme commander of the Death Spectres, a warrior who had served for 3 centuries and consumed portions of over 400 fallen brothers, addressed the chapter in the Great Hall, where all 273 remaining battle brothers had assembled. "We are isolated," he announced, his voice amplified through the Vox system to reach every corner of the vast chamber. "The Imperium cannot reach us. We cannot reach the Imperium. Our navigators estimate the warp storms will persist for decades at minimum, possibly centuries. We must assume we are alone for the foreseeable future." He paused, letting the implications settle over us like a shroud. 273 Space Marines. No reinforcements. No resupply. No communication with the larger Imperium. Just us on this lifeless asteroid with whatever resources we had stockpiled. "We will endure," Thanatos continued. "The Death Spectres have survived worse. We have resources sufficient for extended isolation. Our hydroponics can feed us indefinitely. Our manufactorums can maintain our equipment. Our gene seed stocks can create new brothers. We will continue our mission. We will train. We will maintain combat readiness. And when the storms finally clear, we will emerge ready to serve." It sounded confident, certain, but I had consumed enough memories of older brothers to recognize the undertone of concern beneath the rhetoric. Isolation was dangerous for a Space Marine chapter. Not because of material scarcity, we were well supplied, but because of knowledge attrition. Space Marines learned through combat, through engagement with enemies, through adapting to new threats, through the accumulated experience of fighting across diverse environments against varied opponents. Cut off from the wider galaxy, we had no enemies to fight, no challenges to overcome, no new experiences to integrate into our tactical doctrine. And for the Death Spectre specifically, who preserved knowledge through consumption of the fallen, this presented a unique problem. If brothers died only of training accidents or age-related system failures, we would only be recycling old knowledge. No new memories, no fresh perspectives. Just the same experiences consumed and reconsumed in an endless loop, growing more degraded with each iteration like a recording copied too many times. But we did not understand the full implications yet. That would take time. For the first decade, we maintained something resembling normalcy. We continued training cycles. We ran combat simulations. We performed maintenance on our equipment and our fortress. We recruited new aspirants from the stored gene seed we had collected over centuries. Boys grown in vats from genetic material rather than taken from a Cludus, which we could no longer reach. These vat-grown aspirants were strange, I noticed. They had no memories of life before the chapter, no formative experiences on a death world, no psychological foundations built from years of survival. They were blank. Easier to mold, but somehow less human, less individual. They excelled at following orders, but showed little initiative. They learned the catechisms of hate and the litanies of battle perfectly, but did not seem to understand the underlying concepts. Still, they were bodies. They underwent augmentation with the same attrition rate as Occludus recruits. 60% survival through initial implantation. Another 20% lost during training. Those who survived became neophytes, then battle brothers, joining the ranks and perpetuating the chapter. And when they died, which they did, with predictable regularity during training accidents, we consumed them. But the memories we extracted were thin, unsatisfying. A vat-grown aspirant who had lived only 5 years and known only the fortress had almost nothing to teach us. Their consumed flesh provided minimal knowledge, just recycled chapter doctrine and training experiences we already possessed. It was like eating empty calories, filling the stomach but providing no real nourishment. The quality of memory is degrading. Brother Apothecary Hestus reported to the chapter command during a strategic review I was permitted to attend in my capacity as a senior battle brother. When we consume vat-grown brothers, we receive primarily what we have already taught them. There is no external knowledge, no novel experience. We are approaching a closed loop. Knowledge in becomes knowledge out, with slight degradation each cycle. What are the long-term implications? Chapter Master Thanatos asked. Total knowledge collapse within 2 to 3 centuries at current rates, Hestus said, his voice clinically detached. Each generation of death specters will know slightly less than the previous generation. Skills will be lost, techniques will be forgotten. Eventually, we will devolve to baseline capability, competent but unremarkable. We will lose everything that makes us distinctive. Thanatos was silent for a long moment. Then, recommendations? We need fresh genetic material, Hestus said. We need brothers who have lived, who have experienced novelty, who have accumulated knowledge worth preserving. In the absence of external threats to fight, the only source of such material is our existing battle brothers. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. You are suggesting we consume our living brothers, Captain Heracles said, his voice flat. Not the fallen, the living. Not exactly, Hestus clarified. I am suggesting we optimize the rate of consumption, perhaps increase the lethality of training exercises, perhaps rotate brothers through hazardous assignments with higher projected casualty rates, not murder. The death specters do not murder their own, but controlled attrition, ensuring a steady supply of quality genetic material for the younger generation. That is genocide, I said, and immediately regretted speaking. Junior battle brothers did not contradict apothecaries in strategic meetings. But Hestus did not reprimand me. Instead, he looked directly at me, his augmented eyes cold and analytical. No, Brother Theron. Genocide is the elimination of a people. This is resource management. The older brothers will die eventually regardless. Age-related system failures, accumulated damage, simple entropy. I am merely proposing we be strategic about when and how they die, maximizing the utility of their deaths for the chapter's survival. The logic was impeccable. The ethics were monstrous. But ethics were a luxury we increasingly could not afford. Thanatos made his decision. Implement Hestus's recommendations, carefully, subtly. No brother is to know he has been selected for optimized attrition. They will die believing they died through misfortune or acceptable risk. The chapter's survival supersedes individual comfort. As you command, Chapter Master, Hestus said, inclining his head. I said nothing. What was there to say? I was a death spectre. I had accepted the necessity of consuming the dead. Was consuming the deliberately killed truly so different? The result was the same. Flesh processed, memories extracted, knowledge preserved. But some part of me, growing smaller each year, each feast, each consumption, screamed that yes, this was different, this was wrong, this was crossing a line from necessity into something darker. I ignored that part. Survival required pragmatism. The death specters would endure, whatever the cost. They started small, training accidents that were slightly too lethal. Combat simulations with safety protocols subtly degraded, maintenance errors on power armor that led to catastrophic failures during live fire exercises. Brother Kalen died when his armor's power plant suffered a cascade failure during a boarding action simulation. The resulting explosion vaporized him instantly. We consumed what remained, fragments really, but enough for the Omophagia to extract some memory. I received impressions of his 70 years of service, his expertise in void combat, his memories of battles against Eldar pirates in a sector I would never visit. Brother Drusus died during a hand-to-hand training exercise when his opponent, Brother Sergeant Korvax, struck with slightly too much force, crushing Drusus's skull despite the protection of his cranial reinforcements. An accident, officially. Strategic attrition, actually. We feasted on him 3 days later. I gained his knowledge of close-quarters combat, his particular techniques for fighting orcs, his memory of the last time he had seen an actual enemy rather than training dummies and simulation holograms. Brother Thane died during a drop pod drill, when his harness failed and the impact of landing broke his spine and ruptured both his hearts. We consumed him. I received his memories of terror during those final seconds, his awareness that something was wrong, his inability to do anything as the ground rushed toward him at terminal velocity. The deaths accumulated. One every few weeks at first, then one per week, then multiple per week. The chapter was bleeding itself, slowly, methodically, feeding the younger generation on the flesh and memories of the older warriors. And it worked. The degradation of knowledge stopped. Each consumption provided genuine experience, genuine skill, genuine memories worth preserving. The vat-grown brothers who had been blank and limited became repositories of accumulated expertise, their minds filled with the experiences of warriors who had served for decades. I was consuming someone almost weekly by the 5th year of isolation. My sense of self was fragmenting, becoming diffuse. When I tried to remember my childhood on Occludus, I had to consciously separate my memories from the dozens of other childhoods I had consumed. Kalen's youth on a forge world, Drusus's upbringing on a hive world, Thane's origin on a feral world where humans hunted with stone weapons and lived in caves. Which father had taught me to track? Mine or one of the dozens I had inherited? Which brother had I watched die? My actual father or the fathers of men I had eaten? I was losing myself. And I was not alone. All of us who had been consuming regularly showed signs of identity erosion. We would start sentences and forget which pronoun to use, I or we. We would reference experiences we had not lived, then stop, confused about whether the memory was ours or inherited. We would look in mirrors and momentarily not recognize our own faces, expecting to see someone else, someone we had consumed. The chaplains provided counseling, helped us maintain ego boundaries, taught us techniques for compartmentalizing inherited memories. But it was like holding back a tide with sandbags. Eventually, the pressure would overcome the barriers, and we would drown in other people's experiences. "How long have I been a death spectre?" I asked Chaplain Mordax during one session, my voice uncertain. 37 years, Brother Theron, he said. "And how many brothers have I consumed?" He consulted a data slate. 40, 43. 43 lifetimes integrated into my consciousness. 43 sets of memories competing with my own for recognition as real. No wonder I was fragmenting. "Is it supposed to feel like this?" I asked. "Like I am dissolving?" "Yes," Mordax said simply. "This is the price. Every death spectre who survives long enough experiences this. The chapter becomes more real than the individual. The collective becomes stronger than the self. You are not Theron Vastus anymore. You are the sum of all you have consumed, all who have consumed you, all who will consume you when you fall. You are death spectres, plural and singular simultaneously." It should have been comforting. It was existentially terrifying. But I continued, because what else could I do? Die and be consumed myself? At least if I lived, some core of me might persist, might survive in the minds of those who would eventually eat my flesh. Immortality through digestion, legacy through metabolism. This was what we had become. By the 20th year of isolation, the Feast of Remembrance had transformed from solemn necessity into central ritual, the axis around which the entire chapter rotated. We feasted weekly now. The dead were processed within hours of falling, their flesh prepared and distributed according to strict protocols. Junior brothers received portions from senior brothers, ensuring knowledge flowed downward. Battle brothers who specialized in particular roles, assault troops, devastators, technical marines, received flesh from fallen specialists in those roles, concentrating expertise. The feast chamber could no longer accommodate us all simultaneously. We feasted in shifts, in smaller groups, the ritual repeated dozens of times each week. The walls of the chamber were no longer decorated with just skulls, but with bones, femurs, ribs, vertebrae, taken from consumed brothers and incorporated into the architecture. The chapter was literally building itself from the remains of its own dead. I had consumed portions of over 200 brothers by this point, 200 lives integrated into my consciousness, 200 sets of memories competing for processing time in my augmented brain. I no longer remembered my original name with certainty. Was it Theron? Or was that someone I had eaten? Had I been born on Occludus, or had that been someone else's origin that I had adopted as my own? The apothecaries assured us this was normal, that all long-serving death specters experienced this dissolution. They prescribed chemical treatments that helped maintain ego boundaries, cognitive exercises that reinforced primary memories, regular sessions with chaplains who helped us distinguish between mine and inherited. But nothing could stop the fundamental process. We were becoming hive minds, wearing individual bodies, collective consciousnesses, pretending to be separate people. Some brothers embraced this. Brother Captain Heracles, who had consumed over 300 brothers in his century of service, spoke openly about his dissolution. I am no longer an individual. I am the chapter made flesh. When I think with 300 minds. When I act with 300 lifetimes of experience. I am more than I ever could have been alone. Others resisted. Brother Castor, one of my fellow survivors from aspirant training on Occludus, someone I had known for decades, began refusing to consume. He would attend the feasts but not eat, would cite dietary complications or digestive issues, would find excuses to avoid the ritual. The chapter command noticed. Chaplain Mordax visited Castor's cell, emerging 3 hours later with a grim expression. That night, Castor was found dead, his throat opened by his own combat knife, a note explaining that he could no longer bear the weight of other people's lives, that he chose oblivion over continued dissolution. We consumed him the next day. I received a portion of his flesh tissue from his thigh, dense with muscle memory and skill. The memories that came were fragmentary, confused. Castor's childhood on Occludus mixed with dozens of other childhoods he had consumed, his training mixed with the training of others. His despair at losing himself mixed with the despair of all the brothers he had eaten who had felt the same. His suicide had solved nothing. His consciousness had not escaped. It had merely been distributed, broken apart, and integrated into the rest of us. He lived on, not as Castor, but as fragments within 200 other minds. His fear of dissolution had been realized in the worst possible way. The note had been meaningless. The death had been meaningless. There was no escape except through complete destruction, incineration that would prevent consumption, though such denial was considered the ultimate dishonor to the chapter. I wondered, sometimes, if I would eventually reach Castor's breaking point. If one day I would look in the mirror and see a stranger, would try to remember my name and find only a catalogue of other people's names, would finally accept that I no longer existed as anything meaningful. But I continued, because even if I was an illusion, even if Theron Vastus was just a label attached to a collection of inherited memories, that collection continued to function, continued to serve, continued to fulfill the mission. The self might be lost, but the purpose remained, By the 50th year of isolation, we had developed a system, a cycle, a methodology for perpetuating the chapter through controlled cannibalism that maximized knowledge preservation while minimizing waste. The oldest brothers, those who had served over a century, whose minds were so crowded with inherited memories that they barely functioned as individuals anymore, were rotated into the highest risk assignments. Training exercises designed to kill, simulations where failure meant death. When they fell, we feasted on them, extracting their accumulated knowledge and distributing it to the younger generation. I was no longer young. I had served for 82 years. I had consumed portions of over 700 brothers. My mind was a vast library of other people's experiences. My identity a thin thread trying to hold together an impossibly complex tapestry of inherited lives. I knew how to fight orcs because I had consumed 57 brothers who had fought orcs. I knew how to navigate void combat because I had consumed 34 brothers with void warfare experience. I knew how to maintain a bolter, how to pilot a thunderhawk, how to perform field surgery, how to read enemy tactical doctrine, all because I had eaten those who possessed these skills. I was the most capable warrior I had ever been. I was also barely a person anymore. The chapter numbered 143 brothers now. We had been 273 when the isolation began. We had lost 130 warriors to the attrition, to the consumption, to the necessity of feeding the younger generation on the flesh of the older. But we had also gained 47 new brothers, that grown and augmented, trained through consumption to possess skills and knowledge that would have taken decades to develop through conventional means. They were competent, these young ones. Perhaps more competent than they should be, their minds filled with the accumulated expertise of centuries' worth of combat experience, despite having never fought a real enemy. The Inquisition would not understand this if they ever learned. The Inquisition, with their rigid orthodoxy and their fear of anything that deviated from standard doctrine, would see only the cannibalism, only the horror, only the violation of the taboos that held human civilization together. They would not see the necessity, the efficiency, the brutal pragmatism that allowed an isolated chapter to maintain combat capability across generations despite complete isolation from the Imperium. But the warp storms were beginning to clear. Our navigators reported improvements in warp current stability. Systems that had been unreachable for decades were becoming accessible again. We might have only a few years left before contact with the wider Imperium was restored. Chapter Master Thanatos, who had consumed over 900 brothers in his 3 centuries of service, whose mind was so crowded with inherited memories that he sometimes needed prompting to remember which lifetime he was currently living, addressed the chapter. "The storms are clearing," he said, his voice hollow, ancient, wrong. "Soon we will no longer be isolated. The Imperium will reach us. They will see what we have become. They will judge us." He paused, and I saw him struggle to maintain focus, to push through the overwhelming noise of 900 lifetimes screaming in his consciousness. We must decide. Do we hide what we have done? Do we present a sanitized version of our survival, claim that our dead died naturally and we merely maintained tradition? Or do we tell the truth, that we culled our own to feed the young, that we transformed cannibalism from emergency measure to systematic practice, that we have become something the Codex Astartes does not account for? No one answered immediately. The question was too large, too complex, carried too many implications. Finally, Chaplain Mordax spoke. "We tell the truth. We have survived when we should have perished. We have maintained capability when we should have degraded into incompetence. We have done what was necessary. If the Imperium condemns us for this, then the Imperium is wrong, and we will face that judgment knowing we chose survival over doctrine." Others murmured agreement. Not enthusiastic, we were too far gone for enthusiasm, but resigned, accepting. We had crossed too many lines to retreat now. We were death specters. We consumed our dead. If that made us abominations in the eyes of the Imperium, so be it. At least we would be functional abominations. But I wondered, when the Inquisition learned what we had become, Would they give us the opportunity to explain? Or would they simply declare us heretical and order our extermination? And if they did, would I care? Would anyone notice if the death specters ceased to exist? Or would we just be one more forgotten chapter, our legacy consumed and digested, our existence reduced to a footnote in some administrative archive? I had consumed so many brothers who had wondered the same thing. Their despair lived in me now, mixed with my own, creating a recursive loop of existential dread that no amount of conditioning could suppress. The Inquisition arrived in the 53rd year of isolation. A single ship, an investigation vessel designated Eternal Vigilance, carrying Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Hereticus and his retinue. They made contact via Vox, their transmission cutting through the silence that had surrounded us for over 5 decades. Death Spectre's chapter, this is Inquisitor Covenant. The warp storms have cleared sufficiently for limited contact. We are here to assess your status and ensure your continued loyalty to the Imperium. Prepare for inspection. It was not a request. Chapter Master Thanatos responded, Inquisitor, the Death Spectres remain loyal to the Imperium and the... He paused, almost imperceptibly. A moment of hesitation that I recognized from consuming brothers who had struggled to maintain the required fictions. Emperor's service. We welcome your inspection. They were hollow. We no longer believed in the Emperor's protection, if we ever had. We had survived through our own efforts, through cannibalism and pragmatism and willingness to cross lines that other chapters would not cross. The Emperor, according to the doctrine they taught us, had not protected us. He had abandoned us to isolation and forced us to become monsters. But we maintained the pretense. Space Marines lied when necessary. We were loyal to the Imperium as a political entity, loyal to humanity as a species, even if we no longer believed in the theological framework that justified imperial authority. Inquisitor Covenant and his retinue arrived via Thunderhawk 3 days later. I was part of the honor guard assembled to receive him. 20 of our finest, standing in perfect formation in the main hangar bay. Our black armor polished, our weapons pristine, our appearance suggesting discipline and orthodoxy. We looked like proper Space Marines. We just happened to be proper Space Marines who had been systematically eating each other for 50 years. Covenant descended the Thunderhawk's ramp with the confident stride of someone who held absolute authority. He was old, perhaps 70 standard years, his face lined with age and augmented with subtle bionics that suggested either combat injuries or deliberate enhancement. He wore the formal attire of the Inquisition, black body glove, rosette of office prominently displayed, bolt pistol at his hip, power sword sheathed across his back. Behind him came his retinue, 2 stormtroopers in carapace armor, a tech priest whose red robes suggested Mechanicus affiliation, and most concerning, a psyker, hooded, shackled, surrounded by protective wards, but clearly present for the purpose of detecting warp corruption or psychic anomalies. Covenant approached Chapter Master Thanatos, who stood at the head of our formation. The two regarded each other for a long moment. The Inquisitor's authority, absolute but abstract. The Chapter Master's authority, limited but tangible. Chapter Master, Covenant said, his voice carrying the accent of high nobility, educated and refined. I am here to verify your chapter's continued compliance with Imperial doctrine. You have been isolated for 53 years. Much can change in such time. I will inspect your fortress, interview your brothers, assess your practices. You will provide complete cooperation. Of course, Inquisitor, Thanatos said, his voice steady despite the 900 lifetimes screaming in his head. The Death Spectres have nothing to hide. This was a lie. We had everything to hide, but we would hide it skillfully, carefully, presenting a facade of orthodoxy while concealing the depths of what we had become. Covenant's inspection lasted 3 weeks. He toured the fortress, observed training exercises, reviewed our records, interviewed dozens of brothers. His psyker probed at our minds. Carefully, politely, within the bounds of what was permissible when examining Space Marines. searching for signs of corruption. We showed him nothing. We were disciplined, controlled, orthodox in every visible way. The feast chamber we described as a memorial hall. The bone decorations we explained as honoring the fallen. The consumption of the dead we acknowledged as traditional practice, framing it as rare, ceremonial, limited to specific circumstances. We did not mention the systematic culling. We did not mention the weekly feasts. We did not mention that some of us had consumed hundreds of brothers, that our minds were fragmenting under the weight of inherited memories, that we were barely individuals anymore. Covenant was suspicious. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he watched us, in the questions he asked that probed at inconsistencies in our explanations. But suspicion was not proof. And without proof, even an inquisitor could not condemn a Space Marine chapter. On the final day of his inspection, Covenant gathered the chapter command, Thanatos, the captains, the senior chaplains and apothecaries, in the strategy chamber. "I find no evidence of corruption," he said, but his tone suggested this pleased him less than it should. "Your gene seed is pure. Your loyalty appears genuine. Your practices, while unusual, do not technically violate the Codex Astartes." He paused, letting the weight of that technically hang in the air. "However," he continued, "I am concerned. 53 years of isolation have clearly affected your chapter's culture. Your consumption practices, while traditional for death specters, appear to have intensified. Your brothers show signs of psychological strain. There is something wrong here, something I cannot quite identify, but which my instincts tell me bears watching." "We have survived," Thanatos said simply. "That is our primary obligation." "Survival is not enough," Covenant countered. "The Imperium requires more than mere survival. It requires loyalty, orthodoxy, adherence to principles larger than pragmatic necessity. You survive, yes, but at what cost? What have you become in your quest to endure?" It was a good question. The answer was something Covenant would not want to hear. "We have become what we must," Thanatos said. "The death specters endure. That is sufficient." Covenant regarded him for a long moment. Then, "I will file my report with the Ordo Hereticus. You are not declared heretical at this time. But you will be watched, Chapter Master, closely. The Inquisition does not forget, and we do not trust easily. If I discover that you have deceived me, if I learn that your practices are worse than you have shown me, I will return, and I will not be gentle." "Understood, Inquisitor," Thanatos said. Covenant departed the next day. His ship translated into the warp, carrying his report, his suspicions, his unspoken certainty that we were hiding something terrible. He was right, of course, but he could not prove it. And without proof, we were safe. For now. The Inquisition's inspection changed nothing. We continued as we had been, consuming our dead, feeding the young on the flesh of the old, perpetuating the chapter through systematic cannibalism that had long since ceased to be emergency measure and become simple practice. I had served for 117 years by the time full contact with the Imperium was restored. 117 years of consumption, of integration, of slowly dissolving into the collective consciousness of the chapter. I had eaten portions of over 1,000 brothers, 1,000 lives crammed into my augmented brain, 1,000 sets of memories competing with my original experiences for recognition as real. I could no longer remember my father's face. I could no longer remember my childhood on Occludus with certainty. Had I hunted those six-legged predators, or had that been someone I consumed? Had I watched my father die of radiation poisoning, or had that been inherited memory from one of the dozens of brothers who had similar experiences? I did not know. The boundaries had dissolved completely. I was a useful fiction, a label I applied to this collection of inherited experiences, but not a real thing, not anything that possessed genuine continuity or coherence. I was death specters, plural and singular, 1,000 men wearing one face, speaking with one voice, pretending to be an individual when I was actually a democracy of the dead. New brothers continued to arrive, no longer vat-grown, now that we had reconnected with Occludus. Real boys, with real childhoods, real experiences worth consuming when they inevitably failed during augmentation or training. We ate them eagerly, grateful for the novelty, for memories that were not just recycled chapter doctrine. And we went back to war. Deployments to combat zones across the sector, fighting orcs and tyrannids and chaos cultists, finally engaging real enemies after decades of simulations and training. We fought well, perhaps too well, our skills honed by consuming centuries worth of combat experience, our tactical doctrine refined through systematic analysis of every fallen brother's final battles. The other chapters noticed. They commented on how the Death Spectres seemed too coordinated, too experienced, too skilled for a chapter that had been isolated for 50 years. They asked questions we deflected with vague answers and polite refusals to elaborate. And sometimes, during battles when a brother fell, we would consume him immediately. Emergency metabolization, we called it, eating critical flesh before the body cooled, extracting combat memories while they were still fresh. Other chapters found this disturbing, would request we not engage in such practices while working alongside them. We complied publicly. Privately, we continued. Because we were death specters, and this was what we had become, and we could no more stop consuming our dead than we could stop breathing. And so I returned to where I began. My name was Theron Vastus, and I have been eating my brothers for 217 years. I am 304 years old. I have consumed portions of over 2,000 brothers across my service. My mind is a vast archive of inherited experiences, my consciousness so diffuse and fragmentary that maintaining the illusion of individual identity requires constant effort. When I speak, I am never certain whose voice I am using, my own or one of the thousands I have consumed. When I remember, I cannot distinguish between my memories and their memories. When I think with 2,000 minds simultaneously, their thoughts overlapping and interfering until achieving any clarity requires filtering through overwhelming noise. I should be dead. By all reasonable metrics, I should have died decades ago, my mind collapsing under the weight of consumed memories, my sense of self dissolving completely. But the Death Spectres have refined the process, developed chemical treatments and psychological techniques that allow us to survive longer, to consume more, to serve as living repositories for ever larger portions of the chapter's accumulated knowledge. I am not a person. I am a library wearing power armor. I am 2,000 lives compressed into one body, 2,000 deaths remembered and preserved, 2,000 men who trusted their brothers to eat them and keep them alive through memory. Yesterday, we feasted on Brother Constantine, who fell during combat operations against an orc incursion. I consumed tissue from his arm, approximately 400 grams. The memories came as they always did. His 73 years of service, his 41 combat deployments, his consumption of 600 brothers, his growing awareness that he was losing himself, his relief when the orc's slugger rounds finally ended his existence. Today we received 17 new aspirants from Occludus. Young boys, 14 to 18 years old, with real childhoods, real experiences. They will undergo augmentation. 60% will survive. Those who fail will be consumed by those who succeed. The cycle continues. The Inquisition continues to watch us. Inquisitor Covenant died 19 years ago, but his successor, a younger woman named Sienna, equally suspicious, equally certain we are hiding something, has visited 4 times, has requested access to records we carefully curate, has interviewed brothers we carefully prepare. She knows. They all know, on some level. But they cannot prove it, cannot justify condemning a loyal chapter based on suspicions and discomfort. So they watch, and they wait, and they hope we will make a mistake that gives them the evidence they need. We will not. We are too careful, too disciplined, too aware of what we are and what we must hide. We will continue consuming our dead, continue feeding the young on the old, Continue perpetuating the death specters through ritualized cannibalism that is now so fundamental to our existence that we could not stop even if we wanted to. And I no longer want to stop, because if we stopped, if we abandoned the consumption, then everyone I have eaten would truly die. Their memories would fade, their experiences would be lost, their existence would be reduced to a name in an archive. At least this way, they persist. At least this way, they live on in the minds and bodies of their brothers. At least this way, when I die, and I will die perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in another century, I will not truly end. Someone will consume my flesh. Someone will receive these memories, this vast accumulated archive of 2,000 lives. Someone will carry forward Theron Vastus and Constantine and Marcus and Castor and Valen and Drusus and Thane and all the others, keeping us alive through the simple act of digestion. This is immortality. Not glorious, not comfortable, not what the imperial doctrine promises, but real, tangible, a legacy written in proteins and neural pathways rather than monuments and history texts. The Emperor does not protect. That much I know with certainty, having consumed 2,000 brothers who prayed and received no answer. The Imperium does not care about us. We are too distant, too strange, too uncomfortable for the orthodox authorities to embrace. But we protect each other. Through consumption, through memory, through the eternal cycle of death and remembrance that keeps the death specters alive across centuries despite attrition that would destroy any normal chapter. Tonight, there will be another feast. Brother Demetrios fell during training, his neck broken in a grappling accident that was probably not accidental, part of the ongoing attrition that feeds the young on the old. He was 150 years old, had served with distinction, had consumed 800 brothers over his service. Now he will be consumed, his knowledge distributed among the next generation, his memories preserved, his identity fragmented and integrated into dozens of other minds until Demetrios exists not as an individual, but as a component, a thread in the vast tapestry of the chapter's collective consciousness. I will eat a portion of his flesh. I will receive his memories, combat experience against tyrannids, technical knowledge of power armor maintenance, personal memories of brothers he served with, some of whom I also consumed, creating recursive loops of inherited memory that make my consciousness feel like a hall of mirrors reflecting infinitely inward. And someday, perhaps soon, I will fall, perhaps in combat, perhaps in training. Perhaps my mind will simply collapse under the weight of accumulated memories, and they will find me catatonic, lost in the noise of 2,000 lifetimes, screaming simultaneously. When that happens, they will process my body. They will cut my flesh into portions. They will distribute me among the younger brothers, and I will persist, not as Theron Vastus. That identity is long gone, but as component parts, fragments of memory integrated into the next generation. My father told me that memory is survival, that the dead live as long as we remember them. He was right, though he could never have imagined this application of that principle. The death specters remember. We remember by consuming. We remember by becoming each other, by dissolving individual identity into collective consciousness. We are monsters. The Inquisition is right to fear us. We have transformed a space marine implant into something it was never meant to be, have taken emergency capability and made it systematic practice, have crossed lines that exist for good reasons. But we survive. Against all odds, despite 5 decades of isolation, despite attrition that would break other chapters, despite practices that would see us condemned if fully revealed, we survive. The death specters endure. Not as individuals, but as a collective, as a consciousness distributed across 143 bodies, as 200,000 years of accumulated experience preserved through the simple act of eating our dead. This is what we have become. This is what isolation and necessity and the brutal pragmatism of survival demanded. We are no longer quite space marines, no longer quite human, no longer quite individuals. We are death specters. We are the hungry dead, eating ourselves to stay alive. We are the ultimate expression of the Imperium's true philosophy: survival at any cost, existence justified by continuation, morality subordinated to function. And we will continue, today, tomorrow, for centuries to come, consuming, remembering, becoming each other, until the Inquisition finds proof sufficient to condemn us, or until we have consumed ourselves so thoroughly that nothing remains except the cycle itself, an eternal feast where the devoured and the devourer are one and the same. My name was Theron Vastus. I am 2,000 men pretending to be one. I am death specters, and I am hungry.